We are live. We are live. This is March 27th, and we are finally. Thank you, Ellen. I know we've had you and Maria just hanging out the last few days, waiting to see if we got off the floor in daylight. We did today, so we're gonna start walking through some of the bills we got from the House. 527 is the 248A bill. My version of it is sitting up there on the S bills we didn't take up because I knew this one was coming, and I understand they have done extensive work on this. And we will have extensive testimony, I believe. There's a lot of interest. And then we'll try to get to 940, which is miscellaneous public utilities. So, the floor is yours, Ellen. And we are eating lunch because we just got off.
I'm eating yesterday's lunch.
Yeah, I didn't get lunch yesterday either, so I feel that.
You got great.
I know you're back. Ellen Jankowski, Office of the Legislative Council. H 527 is extending the sunset of 30 VSA 248A. You have already heard about this already this session because you have the bill in your committee as well. But this is the House's version. It's longer than it could be, but it's just about the sunset for 248. So Section 1 extends the sunset on Section 248 applications, and I will remind you about what that is. So currently in statute, effective July 1, 2026, no new applications for certificates of public good under this section may be considered by the PUC. This is extending it 4 years to 2030. So previously you have heard Section 248A is the process available to telecommunications facilities to receive a certificate of public good. When someone is looking to construct a telecommunication facility in Vermont, they have an option. They can either go through the 248A procedure to get a CPG from the Public Utility Commission, or they can go through Act 250 and municipal zoning, and they would need 2 permits. So in 2007, the legislature created this 248A procedure that utilities and merchant vendors can use. Prior to that, they had to go through Act 250. It has always had this sunset provision in it, and I'll walk you through briefly what they have been. The first one in 2007, they did a 3-year sunset till 2010. They took it back up, made some tweaks to the law, then 2011, and then since then, every 3 years, this law has continued to have a sunset in it. So 2011, 2014, 2017, 2020, 2023, and now 2026. And so the House is proposing 4 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And I do think that there is this idea that by having it continue to have a sunset provision in it, it does have the legislature be required to come back and look at this procedure every 3 years and determine if it is still working for this industry. So the House then proposed actually a Public Utility Commission process to review public participation. And so they have this session law provision, which is the rest of the bill. Do you want me to talk about 248A anymore?
A little refresher, I think.
So the Public Utility Commission, this is a siting process, so it is a land use process, at least in part. And that is because there is federal jurisdiction broadly over telecommunications facilities under the Telecommunications Act. So the states are limited in what criteria they are allowed to review as far as telecommunications, and largely they are the land use criteria. So they have this, the federal government has delegated to the state the authority to do largely like what is the physical placement of these facilities in your area. They have reserved for themselves other things that the states cannot review or make permitting decisions on. The big one is related to radio frequency emissions, RF. The state does not have any authority over that aspect of telecommunications facilities. And we are largely talking about towers, but it also does include antenna and the 5G small box facilities, which are a different type of technology that previously largely has been seen, and radio towers. So it also does include radio towers / antennas. So the Public Utility Commission is required to already required to produce public guidance documents. So on their website, you can look at the procedural steps document, which I have, that shows what the steps are for filing an application, and then what is included in the application and what is required in the notice provisions. And then they also have a narrative version on their website as well, the standards and procedures for Section 248 permits. So these are documents that you had already directed that the PUC produce documents for the public to assist in understanding the law. Under Section 248A, there are 3 categories of projects, and that dictates how much of a process they have. So it's de minimis modification of an existing structure. That's a pretty simple application process. And then there are projects of limited size and scope. And then the largest projects have a full application process. Something that's different for 248A as opposed to the 248 process, which is for energy generation project construction. There's this advanced notice period for the larger projects and the projects of limited size and scope. So not the smallest projects. There's a 60-day notice requirement. And so it goes to, it is a notice before they have filed their applications. And I'm happy to talk in depth more about this. This was a long week for me, so I'm forgetting a little bit, but they give notice to the towns as well as the regional planning commissions, and the towns at that point have the option to hold a public hearing, require the developer to show up, and require the Department of Public Service to show up and participate in a public hearing before the application is actually filed.
I see you have some sort of, would it be possible to get a copy of that sent to the?
Sure, it's on the PUC's website, because this is one of their public access documents. Okay. Yep, so this is the procedural steps if you Google, but also, yeah, I can.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, I'm on their website, so where is that on their website? Is it just the general process, or is there a specific 248A document?
Yes, there's a couple 248A documents. I don't have the website in front of me.
Well, that might be a good exercise for us to just see how difficult it is to access. This was part of making PUC more friendly to the public.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep, it's that one. Yeah.
Simple Google.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was on their website, not Google.
Oh,
Trying to find out.
I used to say that.
Oh,
Oh, we certainly heard from people over the years, time and time again, who say the process is difficult, it's legalistic, that a layman typically can't do a reasonable job in answering it, and I've heard a lot of complaints about it.
Now, we worked on that.
Mhm.
And this is, I mean, PUC used to be utility lawyers and utility lawyers. And it was 248A that had a lot of the public.
Yeah.
Wanting to intervene. And they are lawyers and don't speak lawyerese, so. This was part of the effort. It would be good, I think, for us to go back. Try to find it and then see if we understand it. If we don't, we know the public's in trouble.
Yeah, so you did make that amendment a couple years ago to require them to have on their website documents available to the public on guidance for how the process works. So that was the result of one of the sunset updates. And then also the last time that you passed this in 2023, you did include in your and I believe it was this committee, a section 248 report that the Commissioner of Public Service was to consult with the PUC and then report back on the process of citing telecommunications under 248A, address how to make the process easier to participate for municipalities and individuals, and how to encourage municipal participation, and recommend any necessary updates. And they shall be required to hear from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, utilities, and any other interested parties. And I wanted to flag that because the House has included the rest of the bill that I haven't told you about yet.
Right.
The House has also included another report on the same issues, I would say. Looking at how to increase
Was that,
participation.
can I assume that report was done
Yes,
and is somewhere?
yes. I believe there were not many recommendations made because I believe they have done efforts a few times. So you can hear about that, I think, potentially from the department and or the PUC.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So prior to creating the 248A process, these types of projects went through Act 250
And zoning.
and zoning. If there is zoning, depending on where they are.
Yeah.
So what was the logic for creating the 248A process? Was it? Yeah, what was do you remember?
So it was in 2007.
For you.
What I can tell you is that the original version passed in 2007 was for, it was initially specifically for groups of towers being, so it was for the larger scale projects when utility was gonna construct more than, I don't know, more than 5 facilities or something at once. And so it was for the largest projects.
Okay.
I don't know offhand what the actual specific logic was for that, other than the PUC processes generally are more legalistic and like a court and more formal. And then after 2 years later, the legislature came back and amended it to any telecommunications facilities that met this definition. And so there was some indication that the process was working well and people wanted to use it.
Okay. So I'm just wondering, because as you, I think, mentioned, we, the state and the PUC has relatively narrow jurisdiction over telecommunication regulation. It's largely a federal regulation. So this is just regulating the siting of towers but not then the use of those towers. Once they're sited and built, they can't regulate much of the actual.
FCC.
Yeah, exactly. It becomes a federal jurisdiction. So I'm just curious, and that's why I want to know some of the logic of why they went to 248A. Because if this is largely a land use thing, it might make more sense for it to be an Act 250 process. So that I guess I just want to hear more testimony about why it is one versus the other that's largely land use and not really a utility thing.
I want to hear more testimony too. My understanding is that these people wanted this system built out rather quickly. Because we could drive around with our cell phones and they work.
So it was a time thing.
Yeah, it was like 250 will take too long. We gotta come up with something.
I
else.
see. I see. So,
Yeah.
okay. I mean, I still would like to hear more, but
Yeah.
that's a fair point. Just the time thing and, because I mean, I have heard from multiple people that like our constituents that, as Senator Brock said, that this is a really hard process for regularly people to access and because it's very legalistic. And I mean, it's kind of fun that people are like, well, I'd rather have the Act 50, but it's easier to access as a, a lay person than this process is. So it'd be good to hear more pros and
Well, one of
cons.
the things they're saying is it discourages them from participating in it because there's no way that you can participate adequately without hiring an attorney. And that's an expense.
Exactly.
that
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Individual who has a problem typically can't afford.
Right, for sure.
So like a big picture, Ellen, if for some reason we don't, was it 5.7?
Mhm.
If we don't do anything with 5.7 and sunsets, then going forward, all these communication projects are in Act 250. Is that
Mhm.
correct?
And municipal zoning, so they have to do it, they have to do a parallel process for full permits, if the town has zoning.
I think this coincided with the advent of cell phones.
Yeah, they wanted the network to get built out.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Fair.
there were, rather than, putting huge transmission electric towers and your phone lines run down the street, these were towers and some were really big towers and some weren't, but they were having more direct impact on towns. There were just multiple numbers on them. We haven't, electric line,
Right.
we don't run a whole lot of new ones. So that's it. We will start with the PUC. I know we have members of the public that are coming in. And we will, and there's been a few projects on which there have been issues. And there are different people that put up towers and they have different ways of dealing with the public. So we will take a look at that and see if there's anything.
Yeah. I just wondered now that the network has largely been built out, whether the time issue is still as big of a deal or not.
I don't know. I don't know how wide. You go ask the
It's
utility.
pretty spotty between Marshfield and Enfield.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's fair.
I had a merchant complain that he thought that his driveway was the only place because people regularly came down on Route 2 and pulled into his lot to answer their cell phones. Okay.
So I am gonna walk you through section 2, which is the report the House put in. So section 2 is a session law provision. So the Public Utility Commission shall recommend changes to section 248A to increase transparency, efficiency, fairness, and the ability of individuals and municipalities to participate in the telecommunications siting process. The commission shall hold at least 2 workshops on the issue and shall invite at a minimum the following: the telecommunications service providers that have used the section 248 process, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, the Regional Planning Commission, Vermonters for a Clean Environment. On to page 2, the Department of Public Service, the Department of Public Safety, the Agency of Natural Resources, and any other relevant stakeholders. The workshop shall address the following topics and procedures: the advance notice process, including the content of the notice, the length of the notice period, distribution requirements, pre-petition hearings and site visits at the municipal or regional planning level, pre-petition supplements and amendments, recommendation from municipal entities and regional planning commissions, which is a part of the process. The municipalities and RBCs are allowed to make recommendations. Whether municipalities should be required to hold a public hearing on an application, and whether the Department of Public Service should be required to attend. They are currently required to attend if the municipality holds one. The effect of failure to file a petition within 180 days following the advance notice date. Procedures for the post-petition comment period, including consideration of comments, motions to intervene, and requests for hearings, as well as for issuing significant issue determination during the review period under 248A. Procedures for contested case proceedings following a commission's significant issue determination that includes scheduling, site visits, including visibility determination, discovery, and motions. Conduct of evidentiary hearings, including allowing for public participation and streamlining the post-hearing briefing process to comply with the applicable review periods under 248A. On to page 3, evidentiary burdens for section 248A criteria, including rebuttable presumptions for compliance with agency determinations, how and when municipalities are given substantial deference, and if other parties, such as adjoining neighbors, should be given substantial deference. Requirements for supplements and amendments to a pending petition with express standards for substantial and non-substantial changes. Streamlined administrative process for transferring certificates of public good issued under 248A in whole or in part. And any other topics the PUC determines should be addressed through rules or orders following consultation with stakeholders. The commission shall submit on or before December 15, 2027, so a year and a half from now. The PUC shall submit an overview of the process it conducted, the recommendations it has, and a description of any changes the commission made to the section 248 process after consultation with stakeholders to the House Committee on Digital Energy and Digital Infrastructure and the Senate Committee on Natural Resources and Energy, and probably your committee as well. Yeah, and it takes effect on passage. So I did just want to say, based on this, this proposes to give them a year and a half to do at least 2 workshops on this entire list of things. And this structure for this procedure is loosely based on what happened in H710, which is another bill that you're going to consider. So last year you did ask the PUC to get with the stakeholders and come up with do a workshop process to come up with a recommendation for changes to the definition of plant in Title 30. And the House Committee felt like that went very well because it resulted in very clear, direct language that is now in a bill.
With hedges and not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're gonna take what?
Oh, there were, what was screening, what plants, how high did they have to be, and I remember
How you define what is now separate facilities.
Oh, right, I remember this now.
yeah.
And so you have that bill on your schedule next week, but the House Committee felt like giving the PUC specific direction on who to meet with and for how long resulted in a good process. And that is sort of what they were going for here. You may want to consider if this is a pretty long list of things to consider.
That, I would say it is a substantial list, and I'm gonna start based on the bill as it came to us, and first people I would talk to was the PUC and the Public Service Department, and allow them feedback on the bill. And then we can go from there. We'll take public testimony. I have Citizens for Clean. I know that, they wish to testify, so we will have them in.
And then they did hear testimony from attorneys that work in this process and then also in Act 50. And so I think a lot of the recommended language here was coming from people who have been through the process.
Okay.
In 248A and have outlined a lot of the steps. And so asking the PUC to review those steps and if any changes.
But we had an attorney through Barry.
So yes, I do think she'll hear
Be
a lot of.
single time.
She's now on the third.
Yeah, she's on the.
Yeah, she's on the list.
And she did testify in the House, yes, because she has worked on both houses. Yep.
Okay,
Still think I should call it the review board for land use, RBU.
okay. So,
It's such a lot of week for you, but.
I'm sorry.
Don't, Ellen.
So yes, in statutory changes is a very short bill, but there are a lot of different issues for you to dig into, I think.
I think. Yeah, we keep refining it. In general, it seems to be working.
The acid test would be some compliance tests of what's the average time it takes to produce average time it takes to get a result. Common people who actually are people who are applying, what's easy, what's difficult. I mean, a lot of questions that would be asked if you really want a clear evaluation. I'm not certain that all those questions are being asked.
And I would also just add that I do believe they had testimony from one of the attorneys for one of the utilities. The Act 250 and municipal process is still available, and that there are some people who do choose to go that route. So there are pros and cons to either.
Why do people choose to go that route? Would be a question that I
Yeah.
also want to ask.
Okay, so we will definitely have some utility. I have a feeling we'll hear from people who have been through the process. Anybody here has Enosburg in their district? Enosburg.
Yeah.
I think that was one of the towers. There were a lot of issues around. So you might have some folks that want to come in. And we will look at this and we can refine further. The idea was to have a simpler, quicker, kind of process than having to go through 250, which could keep you tied up for several. Of course,
Well, that was the whole idea of 248A, is that it would be a simpler process and easier for people to administer, but most of the feedback that I've heard is that it's not. And again, they're complex subjects, obviously, to begin
Yeah.
with, which is
used to be dealt with by two attorneys who battled it out before.
it's sort of on the list that you would ask the question of what is the most, what is the process of government that you would impose on your deepest, darkest enemy? And where they would rate, and I gather that 248A would rate high on the list.
It probably depends on what you want to accomplish. If you
Yeah.
want
Mhm.
to prevent anything from being built anywhere near where you live, and it's not very efficient, you will like that process. If you want to build cell towers everywhere and have 5G available in every rural back road, it's probably a very inefficient process. So we will hear from both sides and then we will make our decision. But the more things we add that they have to do, the longer we're gonna make the process. I mean, it's like those grains of sand that eventually become a beach. That's been my healthcare thing. We keep adding little grains of sand. They're really good things.
Additions always easier than subtraction.
Yeah, now we have an expensive beach. So, okay. So this one, we will start with more. This is one of the larger bills, so more important. It needs to come out. So I'd like to see if we can't move it along as quickly as possible before we get bogged down in taxes and school funding and all that good stuff. Okay, let's move on to 940 unless there's other question. Okay,
So 940 is truly a miscellaneous bill. It has 3 topics in it currently. There was a 4th topic initially, and that has gone away. So if you looked at the statement of purpose. So the first 2 sections are within my area of expertise. The 3rd section is technically Maria's, but it's just eliminating the telecommunications advisory board, which hasn't met in at least 4 years. That's the last section. So it's a board that stopped meeting and it's getting, so.
yeah, we say that we will hear from them, but that is probably a mature industry that is advising itself right now.
And you've created other structures too. I think you have different reporting now.
And
Built up,
it is
yes.
the early days. Okay.
But the first 2, the rest, basically 90% of the bill is related to energy. So the first section is use of thermal funds. And this is a successor to EMA, for those of you who are familiar with that, the Energy Efficiency Modernization Act pilot program, which was enacted in 2020. And this is the issue that the efficiency utilities, their budgets come from very specific pots of money. And so broadly, there's 2 categories. There's electric energy efficiency, and then there's thermal and process fuel efficiency funding. Those two pots of money have specific things that they can be spent on and not,
They
you can't use the funds for other things.
No,
So,
colonization.
yes, and this committee historically has talked a lot about that. So, Efficiency Vermont has efficiency utility jurisdiction for most of the state. The exception being that Burlington Electric is another efficiency utility, and their jurisdiction is their service territory, which is Burlington and a little bit outside of it. But their territory overlaps with Vermont Gas Systems, which is the third efficiency utility. So Burlington Electric and I'm picturing Vermont, and VGS overlap, and their pots of money for thermal efficiency, they both each have a pot of money for thermal efficiency, and they can only spend those dollars on thermal efficiency, which is a lot of weatherization. Is often weatherization. It can be spent on other things, but because they overlap, their customers also overlap. And Burlington Electric, under original EMA and Efficiency Vermont, that pilot initially allowed them to start spending their thermal dollars on things other than thermal efficiency, including transportation. So EVs was a big thing for them to spend their money on. And then
This is Efficiency Vermont.
no,
This is
So-
Burlington Electric, that's right, because I remember testimony, Burlington Electric, they were charging
Yep.
stations that went in.
and they use it actually, most of what they use it on, I think, is actually incentives because it's for their
Yeah,
customers.
you get a
Yeah.
rebate if you, yeah.
So under EMA initially, let me just finish quickly.
Yeah.
And that was a 3-year program, and then it was extended to 6 years because COVID was in the middle of it. And so that pilot program went for 6 years, and it was both Efficiency Vermont and Burlington Electric, giving them a flexibility on how they spent these funds.
Okay.
This bill you have in front of you is just specific to Burlington Electric because of the unique nature. Efficiency Vermont has not asked to continue that flexibility. They're comfortable right now, I guess, with how it's going without an additional
Okay,
change.
because we did another program just before COVID that allowed businesses essentially to retain their efficiency charges, line charges, and invest in efficiency projects, which could be thermal projects.
Yes, you did that too.
And then we had to extend it because COVID threw a wrench in everything.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking we should revisit that. So this would be a good time to revisit it.
Yes, that was a different program also. Yep.
Okay, but this also, we allowed, because Efficiency Vermont monies raised on the line charge could only be used for electric
Right.
savings.
Yep.
And we allowed them to do a certain percentage or amount towards thermal,
Mhm.
right? And is that what we're now looking? This is
This is the
more
opposite.
limited to Chittenden County.
Yep,
For
and this-
those two, all right.
And this is the opposite because this is saying, Burlington Electric has this pot of money that can only be spent on thermal efficiency, and
Yeah.
they have not been spending all of their funds because their customers are already getting thermal efficiency from BGS.
Okay,
And so can they spend their thermal funds on electric efficiency? So it's the opposite, and
okay.
including, electric vehicles. And there's a couple of examples in here, what they use, with the programs they have, and you can hear from them, but this is, it was part of EMA, but 6 years have passed. That was a pilot. Now this is for another 3-year cycle because that is their budget cycle that they go through with the PUC.
Okay.
Where does Burlington Electric's pot of thermal efficiency money come from?
So the fuel efficiency fund is made up of Reggie revenue, so the regional greenhouse
Yep.
gas, credit sales.
Yep.
And the funding from the, ISO New England forward capacity market. Capacity that we, that Efficiency Vermont bids in, and then we get revenue from that.
Efficiency for, we don't put claims
Yes.
for what we save. That was what we were told. We were crazy. Well, we asked for that in this committee
Yeah.
from ISO New England, and we got it because of the efficiency that we have put in. We are reducing our future claims for more electricity so it's less electricity that they have to produce. And we get credit for it.
Yeah.
I think it's just those two funds.
Are there any other electric utilities that have access to that thermal efficiency money?
No, it's just the three, it's Efficiency Vermont, Vermont Gas Systems, and Burlington Electric is the only three.
They're all
the
efficiency. They're independent efficiency
utilities.
utilities.
Yep.
Everybody else is one big mess. All the utility companies. Most of them are in Efficiency Vermont.
Yeah, because I believe at least what happened was in 1999, when there was this process to create efficiency utilities large scale, Burlington Electric had already had in-house efficiency programs. And so Efficiency Vermont was created to cover most of the state, but they said, we already have our own programs. We're doing it for our service territory. Can we not be part of Efficiency Vermont? And then Vermont Gas Systems also was like, we do something, but it's totally different. So there's mostly the state is covered by Efficiency Vermont and have access to their services. But Burlington Electric and Vermont Gas Systems are a little bit unique. And so we have three efficiency utilities instead of just one.
Yeah, it just seems kind of odd that, I mean, I get you got Burlington Electric and then Efficiency Vermont, that's kind of all the ratepayers
Mhm.
across the state. Then the thermal efficiency is to Vermont Gas and just services one part of the state for Vermont.
Yes, because the rest of the thermal market is unregulated. They're not utilities.
Okay. got it.
Yes,
Okay.
so it is an unusual
So
situation
it's
there.
trying to unpack.
Yeah.
that. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
Do you want me to read through this language for this program? Sure, okay. So H940,
20 pages.
the first part is not that long.
Well, it's round down.
Well, so the section 1 is not that long. So H940 section 1, use of thermal energy and process fuel funds for greenhouse gas emission reduction program. So notwithstanding any other provision of law or order, the PUC to the contrary, the entity appointed under 30 VSA 209B2A, which is Burlington Electric Department specifically, that is also a retail electricity provider. So an entity appointed under the Energy Efficiency Utility Statute, and is also a retail electricity provider. Burlington Electric.
There's only one.
Yep. For calendar years 2027 through 2029, so they have a 3-year budget cycle, may spend any amounts the entity has available to it through annually budgeted thermal energy and process fuel funds and carry forward thermal energy and process fuel funds from prior periods on programs, measures, and services that reduce fossil fuel use and greenhouse gas emissions in the thermal energy or transportation sector, regardless of the pre-existing fuel source of the customer. The entity may also use thermal energy and process fuel funds under this section to deliver thermal and transportation measures or programs that enable fossil fuel and greenhouse gas emission reductions, such as geothermal test well funding, regardless of the pre-existing fuel source of the customer. So that is part of what's already in the statute currently, is that fuel source is also part of the tie. Is fuel switching allowed under the use of these funds? And so again, this is what they have been doing for the last 6 years, but this is again doing it for another 3-year cycle.
Have they found any geothermal? Yeah, I understand it's geothermal is really efficient, but finding it is really expensive.
So networked geothermal has started to come up in the state, and that is smaller scale geothermal. It's not like the large scale geothermal, and it is a viable option in parts of the state. The issue is it is expensive to do retrofit on, and so it's easier with new construction.
Yeah.
But there is a medical office building that has geothermal already in Vermont, the Vermont Gas Systems.
I know that
That's
there's two houses in Montpelier that have.
Yes, so,
Data is
One of our-
geothermal.
One of our schools is beautiful there.
oh, see, yeah.
The Middlebury Library will now have
You
June.
just have to have soil that doesn't have super high sand content.
Well, there goes my yard.
Well, they're
How
going,
about super hard?
what's going on 20 feet below your yard?
Oh, I got that, then I got clay. I don't know what's below that.
We don't know so much about geothermal, also.
But the water table's real high too.
It's a lot more than people realize.
So under this section, the entity shall also prioritize weatherization and thermal sector efficiency programs with its offerings pursuant to this section. On to page 2. So, Burlington Electric did negotiate with the Department of Public Service, who was a little bit concerned about the continued use of these funds. And so they negotiated about, they're going to allow this to happen, but 60%, so on to page 2, shall budget at least 60% of the funds for programs under the section for weatherization and thermal sector efficiency programs to be offered to customers regardless of their pre-existing fuel source, with a minimum of 60% of those weatherization and thermal sector efficiency program funds allocated for customers with low income and low to moderate income. And projects require electric panel or wiring upgrades or abatement of other health or building related items to facilitate weatherization and thermal efficiency. So thermal efficiency is one of the things that these funds can be used for, and the department had an interest in making sure a specific amount was going to go to weatherization, particularly for lower income customers.
Okay.
The entity shall seek approval from the PUC for all planned expenditures through the 3-year performance period as part of the triennial energy efficiency utility planning process and the demand resources planning proceeding, and report to the PUC annually on program participation, including any customer survey data obtained that discuss how impactful incentives offered under this section were for customer adoption. Any funds spent on programs, vendors, and services pursuant to this section shall not be counted towards the calculation of funds used by Burlington Electric for energy transformation projects under the renewable energy standard and the calculation of project costs under the Tier 3 renewable energy standard. So they have to keep these separate from the Tier 3 obligations that they have. And some of these things may technically qualify for Tier 3, but this is separating them out. So they still have to do their Tier 3 requirements.
Okay, we should probably get a refresher course in here on tier 1, 2, and 3. I remember spending hours. And I'm not sure what we did ever made it out of natural resources. So I think at some point we'll have you come back and just remind us or inform those of us who have done this before what they are. Okay.
Sure. So then sections 2, 3, and 4 are on an entirely different topic. So sections 2, 3, and 4 are about the Regional Planning Commission process, specifically about enhanced energy planning. So in 2017, you created enhanced energy planning, which is a process municipalities can go through, as well as the RPCs. It's an optional process, but if a town goes through an enhanced energy planning process, they get their plan approved, that gives them substantial deference at the PUC for section 248 energy certificate of public good process. So it gives the town a stronger voice to weigh in on whether or not they want something built.
Okay.
So this is an update that attempts or is seeking to merge the new regional plan update process that was created as part of Act 181. And so it's merging these two processes because previously the regional planning commissions would submit their energy plans to the Department of Public Service. And that still is gonna happen here, but now it's merging it with the process that the land use review board is also doing at the regional plans.
Okay.
And it is amending some of the same statutes that Senate Natural Resources.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you about that. Yeah, I was like, I recognize this paragraph.
I said some of these are starting to sound.
Is it gonna be problematic?
Well, I'm going to try real hard to make sure these things don't conflict, and perhaps it may be a good idea for them to be in the same bill.
Yeah.
We probably should speak together and decide on the vehicle.
Mhm.
And what will go where, okay.
And so, yes, the S
Wait,
325.
I think they're looking at me.
So S 325 is a vehicle that has language related to this as well.
Okay.
So
That's not surprising.
So section 2 is amending 24 VSA 4348, adoption and amendment of the regional plan. So it's adding that 60 days prior to the first meeting on a regional plan. If the regional plan is seeking the optional determination of energy compliance, they will also submit it to the Department of Public Service for review and comments on whether or not they have conformed to the statute.
Yeah, the more I look at this, the more I think we might ask if natural resources might like this. You know, especially if they're working on something similar.
Well, Senate Natural Resources just sent their bill today to the House.
Yeah, that was the bill we did on the
Yes.
floor today.
Oh.
Yeah.
And we had the issue where,
But if the House, that House may be interested in putting it in S 325.
yeah, but maybe natural resources should work on this since we've just done it. on
Well, yeah, I'll
Work on
talk to
regional
the
plan.
chair over there. Maybe our people can talk to the House's people and we can figure out the best path.
And in everyone's defense, this bill started before S 325 even existed.
Yeah,
So didn't know that there wasn't initially a land use vehicle.
Okay.
And so then on page 4, the RPC shall, if it's submitting and seeking the optional determination, solicit feedback on the enhanced energy plan, including consistency with the requirements, when they do the initial 30 days prior to the first hearing on the plan. So it's working it into the existing procedure that the RPCs have to go through instead of going through a separate procedure with the Department of Public Service. And then at the bottom of page 4, after the plan has been adopted, the Regional Planning Commission shall also, at the same time, if seeking the optional determination, submit the plan to the Department of Public Service for review. So after they've adopted it at the regional level, then they submit it to the Land Use Review Board. At that time, they're sending it also to the Department of Public Service for review for conformance with the statutes. Section 3 then updates 24 VSA 4350, which is about the municipal planning process, and it adds to the list of requirements that the municipality shall have as part of their planning process. If they are seeking the energy determination, they shall also include the enhanced energy standards as part of their municipal plan process.
This is all plan.
Yes. Yes. And then there's one more section on it, which is actually the statute on the enhanced energy planning.
Okay, I'm going to send an email to the chair of natural resources and ask her to take a look at this and see if they want it in conjunction. I'd rather let them work on it or decide it's already been done to some extent. but see if she would like to work on this.
This is
bill.
different than what we did.
Yeah, it's
just
different
the-
than what is out. But it definitely is more municipal land use, other than the couple things up there on utilities, and we can work on that.
Do you have an H bill from them? You can just tag this on.
Look at that.
I don't think so. I mean, we haven't gotten all of our H bills. You would know, but yeah.
No, there is, so, no. So that's one of the awkwardness here, but communication, I think will
Help.
Yeah.
Okay,
because the House already passed this, and so
yeah,
they have your land use bill.
they could put this on the land.
And we still have, we're only halfway through the session, so I think.
True, yeah.
And then,
And I think 248A is going to take up time. And we have a major school funding miscellaneous tax bill headed our way, which is one of those things that as the pressure finally mounts and things start happening with maps and districts, and we will need to be prepared to move quickly. So,
yep, and then so just so to remind you, I already said it, but the telecommunications advisory board is repealed in section 5.
oh,
And they
okay.
haven't met in, I think, at least 4 years, so.
Okay, so we can do telecommunications and efficiency utilities.
Getting rid of a
Ask
board.
for- Yeah.
Getting rid of a board, Randy.
Yeah.
Get rid of fees.
We
Don't
got
tell
rid of
people.
fees today.
That's right.
We lowered fees.
Condition.
Okay,
I like it.
all right, I think that's it. Thank